Thank you so much for joining us on the Dwellynn Show. I'm your host, Ola Dantes. I've got an incredible guest with us today. I've got Nancy on the phone with us today. Hey, Nancy, how you doing?
I'm doing great, and thank you so much, Ola, for having me on your show. I'm very excited to be here.
Likewise. Well, let's jump right into it. Can you tell our listeners a little bit more about who you are, what you do, and actually what you've been doing lately?
Okay, so I've been investing for, I don't really want to say how many years because I'll date myself, but it's been a while. I started out, I was a property manager and organically grew a pretty good sized property management company. I'm buy and hold investor for a long time, and have done some flips and wholesaling. So at the beginning of the pandemic, we moved into owner financing and creating notes and that kind of thing. And so the pandemic kind of changed that for us, just because people were almost losing their jobs and down payments were so we thought so we ended up selling. We had 3 properties at that particular time. We just sold them. I think we had 1 owner finance and then 2 just retail, which we did fine. And interestingly enough, we got into Airbnbs over the pandemic. So we took some long-term rentals and did some analysis, and it just kind of happened. And I was like, oh my gosh, this is very lucrative. And for whatever, people are traveling, they don't want to stay in a hotel. So we've been focusing on Airbnb. We actually sold a couple of our rentals and 1031 exchanged and bought a couple more properties, a higher end that we could do Airbnb. And I do a lot of talking and mentoring people that I think what I specialize in is a lot of different things, but one of them is getting creative with strategies and pivoting and kind of reading the market to say, you know what, probably not the best time right now to be a landlord. And I had written this whole, the 3 pillars of being a landlord right before the pandemic. And I was like, oh, well, no one really wanted to be a landlord because there was all the eviction moratoriums and tenants didn't have to pay rent. So I was like, that's probably not the best time to be promoting being a landlord. So, but I think it's very interesting, like what the pandemic has given us, in terms of being real estate investors. I know you're in Houston, I'm in Dallas, hugely competitive markets. A lot of investors, I never really focused on foreclosures. I'm a pre-probate gal, which, no matter what's happening in the world, you can usually get leads that way. And I think that, a lot of investors kind of got stuck because they didn't have multiple marketing streams. They didn't really know how to read the market. And some of them struggled. And I'm not saying I didn't have my struggles. You have to kind of stop when something's not working and go, okay, well, being a wholesaler right now is probably not, it's really tough to be a wholesaler. You've got to get that deal so low so that you can make money. So right now we're focusing, we still have rentals. We still do owner financing, and Airbnb has been my latest venture.
I was taking so many notes. Okay. So you
and it's kind of funny because we were talking about being in that book together.
Yeah.
So I also teach people how to invest with their self-directed IRA, and I specialize in, like, there's a lot of people out there that have less than $50,000 and it's just sitting there in a custodial account, not earning money. They're paying fees on it. So my most famous deal probably that landed me in that book was, buying a property here in the historic district of Fort Worth, for $5,000, owner financing it for $50,000 with 20% down. And that's kind of propelled me into really figuring out how you can use multiple, from a private money lending standpoint. So many people want to put their $10,000, $15,000, $20,000 to work. And there is a way you can combine not the funds, but you can combine the account holders. They're all in first lien position. It's way more, it's not a hard strategy. It's just a lot of paperwork and a lot of steps that you have to understand so that you don't, get your lenders in. But I use a lot of private money lenders that have small dollar IRAs, and I put them together and buy deals and do owner finance with it. And so that's a really good strategy.
So for those that didn't catch that, Nancy and I were actually in a book that was published by Bigger Pockets. Some of my listenership might not even know about this, but I was featured in that book, and Nancy was also featured in that book. I tend to be somewhat bashful and not draw attention to myself, but yeah, when this.
Well, I'm gonna give you a shout out because it was a really good story. So I'm gonna give Kim Christine a plug. Say go. If you don't know what we're talking about, go buy the book Profit Like the Pros.
Profit Like the Pros. Yeah, I think I'm on chapter 7 and you're chapter 13.
12.
Sorry, 12, my bad. 12.
Yeah, but you gotta get those chapters right,
Yeah, I've got the book here, but you can't really see it because I got my virtual background up. But yeah, we'll probably put that in the show notes as well.
Yeah, I'll see. Let's see. I'll just.
Oh yeah, there we go.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And he just got his new TV show. I don't know, we're not here to talk about Ken, but we'll give him some plugs. So
yeah, no, definitely. So you've done quite a bit, right? You property managed assets, you've done some wholesaling, you had some rentals, you still have some rentals.
Yes.
And then you were kind of just going with the market, right in the market, like, hey, things are getting a bit, things are changing. Let's kind of pivot into Airbnb. You kind of mentioned a little bit why you guys got into Airbnbs, but I want to go back to the beginning. Why did you kind of change from property management to buy and rental? Because I'm guessing chronologically you started in property management, then you became an investor.
Well, actually, I started as a landlord. I had no background. We came from Phoenix, Arizona. So I've been through, a market or two change. And when Phoenix, Arizona, back in 2006, 7, 8, when the big, they had the big up and then the big crash, we ended up taking a leap of faith, and we saw we'd been in our regular house, for 8 years. And we just started looking around our neighborhood. And I was like, oh my gosh, can you believe what people are paying? And I was a blood bank management consultant. Okay. I was not into real estate at all. And so my husband and I, we said, we have, this is a good way to make money. I mean, we quit our jobs, sold our house, and moved to Texas. We just took a leap of faith because I said, you know what, we're
good
both
idea.
smart.
Texas is amazing.
Anywhere. Yeah. And you can figure it out. You can get jobs anywhere. The money, we weren't going to be taxed on those monies. So what happened was we moved to Texas, and I had always been interested in real estate. I just never, gave it the time or didn't think I had enough money or whatever. So my first rental property, I used a realtor. I just bought it off the MLS. I didn't know, and I wanted to become more knowledgeable about how to be a landlord and make it profitable. And so I actually went to work for this property management company for peanuts, because they didn't want to hire me because I didn't have any experience. But I had all this management and business, savvy kind of stuff. So anyway, long story short, I ended up working with another person, and we organically grew a property management company here. We didn't advertise, and unfortunately that person passed away. So here's a tip for your listeners, because we were friends. And we never thought that when you're younger, you think, oh, nothing's ever going to happen. And we never formalized it in writing. Yeah, big mistake. So just a long story, I just decided it was time for me to move on. And that was about 2016. And I was like, So I had all this knowledge, and I was one of the very few property managers in Texas that was certified by the Texas Real Estate Commission to teach other people how to property manage. So I, at that time, still continued to manage my own properties, because every time I went to go hire a property manager, I was like, yeah, you should have known that, So fast forward. So then I said, okay, well, there's got to be, and we also, our portfolio, we couldn't get more money. I didn't know about creative financing strategies. And I was like, we were just kept getting mortgages. And it was like, okay, there has to be a better way to get properties. So I just started asking a ton of questions. I annoy a lot of people. But then I said, okay, well, why couldn't I got into seller financing. And then I did some wholesaling. Then I did some flips. And I was like, okay. And, I kept marketing and talking to sellers, and, not every deal was, a home run. I mean, there were a couple deals that were definitely not home runs. I learned a lot about, I would partner, and I would learn, I didn't ask all the right questions when I was partnering, or So there was just a lot of things that you don't know. You don't know what you don't know, right?
Exactly.
But I feel like I didn't let any setbacks stop me. I just kept moving forward, picking up myself by my bootstraps. And I'm very fortunate because my husband is he's in the business with me. He's very supportive. In fact, for Valentine's Day, I'm going to do a thing on how husband and wives work together in real estate. So
Nice.
but
Nice.
I think the first time I said, when I got into owner financing, was the deal that's in Ken's book. And I was like, oh my gosh, because I used it with my self-directed IRA. So I've been self-employed for many years, and probably I don't have, who feels like they have enough money, right? So I felt like I didn't have enough money in my retirement. And so when I kept going to these lunch and learns about, how to invest with your self-directed IRA, and this deal literally just, I had done some marketing. My marketing is very simple and low budget. I mean, I've done the whole call center thing and all that. And the guy called me, and I wasn't the first investor, but I think a lot of times sellers, when they connect with you, you're going to do, it's like that old saying, they're going to do business with who they like, know, and trust. And we just had a great conversation. The house had been vacant for 5 years. The city was getting ready to turn it down. And that was just such an eye opener. And then from that opened a lot of doors, because then I started speaking about how to do deals with your self-directed IRA. I think when people get into real estate, they don't understand that there's, you've got to have certain skills. I'll talk to people and they'll, like I teach people just like cold calling, and it's not just about dialing that number. It's about a whole mindset. A lot of people are nervous about it because, oh my gosh, they're not very savvy at doing it. So along the way, I became a mentor, a coach, an educator, a speaker, just because of my experiences. And I think, for your listeners, anybody who's like struggling, that's part of the game of being a real estate investor. If you're not struggling, you're very fortunate. But I think
you're not doing it right. Yeah, you're not doing it right.
Exactly. Or I feel like if you're doing the same, I think when you branch out, so gurus teach, 20 different strategies. And I think, people get they just get discombobulated, right? And so really what I tell people is you got to learn one strategy and do it well, and then you move on. And that's how I feel my journey's been. I'm very knowledgeable about property management, getting a tenant out. And I have to say, through the eviction moratorium, I never had a tenant that didn't pay. And I chalk that up to my tenant screening from the very beginning, because I tell landlords, if you don't get the tenant in there right, forget about it. You can buy the property right, you can, have it be beautiful, but if you skip that step of doing proper tenant screening, you're going to have a problem whether we're in a pandemic or not. They're going to, tear up your place, not pay, just kind of be a pain, right? So I think if you look at the journey I've been on, I think a lot of people could follow it, just because I looked at, okay, I'm going to master property management. That's exactly what I did. And by doing that, I honed and developed my skills so that I spoke with owners, I spoke with sellers, I spoke with tenants, and think about those 3 different groups, and what approach you need to take to problem solve. Years ago, I used to run a Section 8 program in Johnson County, Kansas. And at that time, that was when it had just started. It was kind of the new thing the government was doing, not to have public housing, but people had certificates. And from that position, that role, I had to work with tenants that were on our program, developing waiting lists and the process and documentation. So to this day, I used a date stamp. And go to the store, it's like, I don't know, $4. And to this day, I still use a date stamp when I'm working with my tenants, when I want to document something, because you never know, like whether a seller comes back, a landlord comes back, a title, whatever it is, that date of when that transaction occurred or that piece of paper was received is so important. And it's just a habit I got into way back when I ran that program. So I think communication is key, and just move forward and keep learning.
So Nancy, let's talk about some of your Airbnbs, right? If I'm a listener and I'm listening to this, to you and I discuss this strategy, what do I need to do to get started? And maybe give us a story of one of your Airbnbs. How did you find the deal? How did you fund it? And how is that deal going?
Okay, so we had been looking for a little lake house for our family and I. It's something that I'm getting ready to have my first grandbaby, and and just something that like could be a family thing. I grew up on a lake with boating and all that. So my husband and I, we live in the Dallas, Texas area. So there's a Lake Granbury is about 90 minutes, because it had to have certain parameters. It had to be, within driving distance. So you get there, have a nice weekend or whatever. And so number one, location, because when we were looking for an Airbnb, what I did is I'm a real estate broker. So I did my search online and whatnot. The location, I didn't really know if I was going to Airbnb it at that particular time, because this was about 2.5 years ago. So we looked at location, but HOA. So number one, we kept calling these areas. And so if you do not buy an Airbnb in an HOA, because even if they allow it today, they can change that. So that was kind of priority one. Number two was the location, like what would attract people. I just met with somebody that they did they called me up about a place in Winters, Texas. I didn't even know where that was. And I had to look it up. And we actually did a session where we went through and does this make sense? And he had it under contract. And not only would it not make a good Airbnb, it wasn't even a good investment property. So then what you do is you go in and you see, so location, no HOA, then you've got to see, well, what can I charge for the rent, And so I have two tools that I use. So Bigger Pockets, shout out for their tools, because it can take you, for buying it, but also there's a link that goes right to AirDNA, right? So I use AirDNA and I use the free version. I don't pay for it. And then you can go in there and you can say, okay, you can type in any property pretty much in the United States, and it will tell you based on the number of bedrooms and people, what your nightly rate, what your vacancy rate, what your cap rate is. So that was one of my tools I used. But another tool I used was I went on Airbnb as a guest. And I looked at the area that I wanted to invest in to see what my competition was, so and what they were charging, because if AirDNA says $300 a night, but then you go to Airbnb as a guest, and when you do your search, do multiple days, because if I did it, let's say over spring break, not all the Airbnbs are going to show up. So you want to get as many to show up. So I usually go, 6 months, but I do different seasons depending on where I'm looking at. So then you have two numbers. You have one, the AirDNA number that says, okay, you could charge this much, but then you have the reality of what people are actually getting on Airbnb. So once you do all of that, you've identified your property. Now I'm partial, and it's my own personal investment strategy. I buy 3-bedroom, 2 baths, or 4-bedroom, 2 baths. I don't, the higher end homes are that's not my investing strategy. And most people, whether you're doing long-term, because the other part, let me back up. I didn't want to just buy property that could only be an Airbnb. It had to have, because when I buy properties, they always have to have 2 separate exit strategies. Number one, what if the market, like right now, Airbnb is hot, it's, everybody's getting into it. If the market gets saturated and I now can't carry that as an Airbnb, I want the strategy of long-term rental, owner finance. So that would be another way I would look at it. So now you've done all your numbers, you've identified a property. You should also look at the population. This little Winters town I was talking about only had about 2,500. Now, granted, you don't want to rent to locals, but you also want it to have in an area where people are going to, want to come, right? And nobody's going to come to Winters, right? Because there was no big attraction there. And even if there was an attraction, like maybe they had a big medical center. If they had a medical center, that'd probably be okay. But if they only had one attraction that was only open, let's say for the summer, what are you going to do the rest of the 9 months? So you have to think about the carrying cost and all that. So once you've got the property, then it's about, getting it furnished. And, I would say it cost us. So we found this property. We kept going to this area, this Lake Granbury area, and everything that we found was either, $500,000 and still needed $200,000 worth of work. And this was before the market went crazy, or it just wasn't, Granbury sits up on a hill, on like cliffs, and, too many stairs, just whatever reason. So my husband and I ended up going out to dinner one night, one of the local restaurants, drinking some wine, talking about how can we get a property here. And the waitress came over and started talking to us, and we told her. So she told us about this neighborhood that wasn't even coming up on our searches. So referrals actually are a big part of my, because I tell everybody, here's a tip for your listeners. I tell everybody what I do. And if they ever know of a house for sale or somebody that needs to get rid of their house, call me. So she's like, well, go look in this neighborhood. So we went and looked in the neighborhood the next day, and we actually had a couple of appointments to see properties. So we see this property, and from the street, it looked like nothing. I mean, no wonder it had been on the market. It was coming back on the market. The year before, it had been on the market for almost a year. And why? Because the listing agent only put one picture. She didn't say it was on the water, and it just sat there. So we went and looked at it, right? And so we got out of the car and we went around to the back, and it's a little 3-2, no garage. It's just a little, it's kind of perfect for us. And we were like, oh my gosh, it's not on the main body, but it's not a canal house either, which I don't know if you're familiar with that, but it's in an area that if there's a big drought, we'll still have water and be able to get to the lake. So we were like, we had the agent meet us there. We told them to bring the contracts. We made the offer full price right then and there. Boom, got it a contract. And the seller had it for 15 years. And, I guess his wife had gotten sick. So we always do inspections. I don't care what kind of house. If I'm going to keep it, I'm always going to do an inspection. So we spent a pretty penny getting that thing up and running. And then as soon as it was done, I put it on Airbnb. At first, I didn't hire a professional photographer. I just did it with my iPhone, threw it up on Airbnb, and it just started getting booked. So fast forward February of 2000 and when do we have the big freeze? 2020?
2021.
Yeah. So we had just bought the house the year before. Anyway, we had done all this work, big freeze. I called our plumber that we had spent a pretty penny with to go over there and turn off the water, and they didn't. They forgot. So we had a busted pipe. Yeah. So it took from February 19th, it was February 19th, and we didn't get that thing back up and back on Airbnb till August 3rd, but from this past year. Now, you're shaking your head. So there's some good and bad to this. It was very annoying because you're in the pandemic. Supplies and stuff started really going up. Contractors were an issue. But here's another tip. Make sure you have really good insurance. There's only about, I think, 6 insurance carriers that do actually Airbnb. Your normal landlord policy is not the same as you need to make sure that your insurance agent does do Airbnb short-term rentals. Anyway, we had that in place, and we were able to claim the loss of rent. Yay!
Fantastic.
And
fantastic.
We also hired, we also knew, because of the magnitude of just what everybody went through, we hired a public adjuster to work with the insurance company, because literally February 19th, I was at the property. It was a disaster. I called the insurance company, filed a claim right away. They called me a few days later and wanted to do a video and pay me out $5,000. I was like, yeah, that is not going to happen. So we got a public adjuster involved, and we were able, like the AC unit. So this was an older house that had ductwork under the house. It was a pier and beam home, and it got mold in it because water got down there, so we got a new AC unit. So we got some things as an upgrade because of it. So it was kind of a blessing in disguise. It was annoying. And now we put that thing, like I said, August 3rd. So since then, we've done 2 other properties. And so what I look for, and they're not on the water, but they have, so one little house is close to the historic district down there. So we're like, okay, well, it's just a little, no HOAs. None of these are in HOAs. So we put a hot tub there and you make that. And then the other tip is to be pet friendly. I know a lot of people don't really like that, but I travel with my pets and now I only allow dogs. I have a maximum of 2 dogs and I only charge like a $200 pet fee per stay. And then my house rules. So when you start advertising your properties, you unfortunately, like long-term rentals, you can't charge, a big security deposit. People are just going to pass on your property. So make sure you have good insurance, for vandalism. And so we've been doing Airbnb steadily for over a year now, and it's just been a great revenue source. Like I'm just amazed at how much more money that I've made on short-term rentals than I ever did, financially in terms of the amount of money that you can make versus a long rental. Now, on each of these properties that we're doing Airbnb on, if I wanted to, I could do owner finance or long-term rental, because as everyone knows, housing is at a premium right now. And that could be, I could sell them outright. I wouldn't do that because, I did 1031s to avoid the capital gains tax. So that's kind of how it was, the referral. And then the other cool thing that we did when we sold, we had rental properties that we had held on to forever here up in the DFW area. And you can imagine the appreciation was just, they more than doubled, right? So we decided to cash those out through 1031, and we went and bought a couple higher end properties. And I bought them right off of the MLS, because with an Airbnb, I'm still buying it right. And I'm not paying crazy amounts over, like I'm not paying 10, 15,000. I'm still buying them, but I don't have to worry about, 70% of ARV, because I'm looking for turnkey, especially right now with the, contractors and supplies. It's almost better if you can do that and start doing an Airbnb. So I bought them right off of the MLS. All I had to do was furnish them. Boom, I get them back up and running. And so you can, purchase a home, get it up and running. And if you're really like, you can get it up and done in 2 weeks, 2-3 weeks.
Wow,
with photography.
Yeah.
So the last 2, one just went live just a couple days ago. So don't have any numbers for that one, but the other one went live, I think, as soon as I put it up. And again, now since then I have professional photography, but I wanted to get it up and running, right? I wanted to get it up and running. So I threw it up on Airbnb. It's actually quite simple to manage your properties. You can buy apps that, coordinate all the calendars. And so far what I've found is most people come right from, 90% of the bookings come right from Airbnb. And then we were able to automate some of the messages, just talking to the guests. And then we have certain rules, like one, you have to have a verified, I don't take newbies, because I feel like I'm kind of new into the Airbnb. So I'm, and I've heard horror stories. There's lots of great Facebook pages out there that you can learn from the horror stories,
Interesting.
But so if somebody was looking to get into Airbnb, I'd say, number one, what's the location? And are you going to manage it yourself, or are you going to, have it remote? Because, like the Smoky Mountains, that was a place I really wanted to invest in. But they have a lot of HOAs, so you got to be careful. And I'm not that familiar. I haven't even been there. So I was like, okay, that's probably not a smart move on my part. But the HOAs, as more regulations, like even in Dallas County, they're having, they've done some regulations about, you can do short-term rentals, but they have to be 30 days or longer. Well, that's almost like being a rental. And I'll just give you another example. Yeah, I actually live in Frisco, Texas. So my HOA last month had a meeting, and they were going to talk about, short-term rentals in our neighborhood. So I wasn't able to go to the meeting. And so, they ended up passing a regulation that you cannot have short-term rentals. They have to be 6 months or longer. And so the other day I got a letter from my HOA saying, you're in violation of doing short-term rental. This is my personal home, and I don't rent out any room. I don't do any kind of short-term rental on my personal home. So I got right in touch with them. I was like, well, and they said they had it from their inspection. So I wrote right back to them, and said, what was this? What did they find? And of course they didn't, it's a courtesy, but you actually said that I was in violation. So just be careful. And HOAs are kind of one of those, I don't know, it's like tight underwear, it really can bother you.
Well, Nancy, we can keep going on and on, but we're definitely dwelling into the quick rounds. These are going to be quick questions, quick answers. You ready, ma'am?
Okay. Right.
First question, what makes you, Nancy, unique? What is that differentiating factor that separates you from the next girl or the next guy?
I think because I'm very straightforward and direct, and you either like me or you don't, and I just tell it like it is.
I love it. Second question, what was the last book that you read? And what was the one thing that you picked up from that book?
So I'm actually reading Brendon Burchard's Millionaire Messenger, and he has a very no-nonsense, straightforward way of marketing. And so I'm learning really some good about increasing your followers and just taking imperfect action.
Interesting. If you're into that right now, there's a guy called Brendan Kane.
Okay.
Brendan Kane, check him out on Instagram. I think his book is How to Get 1 Million Followers in 30 Days. And then he's kind of a book called.
Is it C-A-N-E or K-A-N-E?
K-A-N-E, and his first name is Brendan. Is a really good one. So if you're into that kind of like social media marketing right now, yeah, that's a good one. Final question. You're busy with your short-term rentals. You're doing a bunch of stuff, spending time with your husband as well. What do you do for fun these days?
So I'm expecting my first grandchild. So I've been helping my daughter prepare, and I'm so looking forward to meeting my grandson. So I'm just, I love spending time. And so I've been trying to spend as much time with my daughter before, our roles change, where I'm not a grandma, I'm Nana, and she becomes a mother. And it's been an interesting journey, with her. She's my only child, and, she's just, so I spend time with her, and I've been loving watching her grow in this new role, literally grow.
Oh, that's so sweet. Yeah, our baby, she's probably she's like 19 or 20 months now. And so I can relate. Yeah, we've got two babies. Yeah, so enjoy that. It's amazing. It's amazing. So before we kind of go into the end of our conversation here, your two books, Winning Deals and Ills, let me ask you this, and also you have a course, the Capital Blueprint Project. Just kind of give us briefly a little bit about those projects, your book, and obviously your course, and then just wrap up with how people can find you and get connected with you.
Okay, thank you. Yes, so Winning Deals and Heals, really I wanted to get a message out to women. In real estate investing, if you go to a lot of seminars and things, there's very few women on the stage. There are a ton of successful real estate investing women. I just don't know if they don't like getting talked. Also, I work specifically with women because there's a lot of women who, they have always wanted to get into real estate, but maybe they didn't have a supportive partner. They were busy raising their kids, doing their career. And so now they're at a point in their life where they think they're too old, and you're never too old, because I was not a spring chicken. But let me ask you, this came from that whole thing I was talking about earlier about, when you get stuck and you can't, where do you get the money? How do you do the deals? And I literally was annoying everybody because I was like, well, how do you do this? And I'm the kind of person, like, if you tell me you can't do it, I'll say, well, why? Or, well, what can we think of a solution? So that's where that book came from. And then the Capital Blueprint Project, actually what that ended up turning into was my accountability project, because it seems like the number one thing that all real estate investors need is accountability in their life. And, I've hired mentors and coaches through my journey, because you can watch videos, you can, read books, but when it comes to practical experience, you've got to get into the game. But sometimes people are afraid because they don't want to lose all their money. They don't know what they're doing. Just for an example, I talked to a young lady a couple of weeks ago, and she had paid thousands of dollars for this real estate course. And the thing is, she didn't even know how to analyze a property, because I was like, well, what do they teach you? So I believe people need step-by-step and hand holding. That's what I had when I bought that first property. I was so nervous. I didn't know what I was doing. I didn't, and I literally had someone that took me by the hand, showed me the ropes, and it was step, step. So that's how I like to work with people. Is I think people, they want to do it. They just need someone to hold them accountable and hold their hand. And to get a hold of me, so I'm going to ask your viewers this, because my goal of getting 500 subscribers on YouTube by March is really important to me. So my name, Nancy Wallace-Laabs, that's L-A-A-B as in boy, S as in Sam. So go to if they like what they're hearing, go to my YouTube channel and subscribe. My email address is nancy@kbnhomes.com, and I have a website under my name as well. I'm on Instagram, Nancy Wallace-Laabs. If you just get Nancy Wallace-Laabs down, you're going to find me. So
and we're going to put that in the show notes as well. So thank you so much, Nancy. Really appreciate your time today.
Thank you all. It was a pleasure. It was a pleasure.
Likewise.